Our national security professionals can seek a court order to obtain certain business records. Our law enforcement professionals can seek a roving wiretap to keep up with terrorists when they switch cell phones.
The president continues to conduct an illegal program.
These tools are not controversial.
We are not collecting the information of spies. We are not collecting the information of terrorists. We are collecting all American citizens' records all of the time.
The government will no longer hold these records. Telephone providers will.
I think the bill may be replacing one form of bulk collection with another.
There you go, the back and forth between President Obama and Rand Paul. Speaking over the weekend, both of them talking about the NSA, their ability to collect bulk data. The president specifically talking about the USA Freedom Act there at the very end. That's a great place to start our roundtable.
It is.
And hopefully we'll have Mark Meckler joining us in just a moment. First, we have Daniel Hochheiser, who's with us here today, criminal defense attorney and radio host. Daniel, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Are you concerned now that the NSA is not collecting bulk data on suspected terrorists? Are we all a little bit safer today, or more at risk, I should say, or more free?
Well, I think we're a little bit more free. The Patriot Act is a little big brotherish in that they're collecting all of our telephone records all of the time, regardless of whether we're committing any crimes or involved in any terrorism. So, you know, this is really a victory for Senator Rand Paul, who fought hard for this issue and has at least delayed enactment of a successor piece of legislation. We'll see what happens in the future.
All right, let's also talk about a specific comment that Rand Paul made yesterday during his address from the Senate floor. Let's take a listen.
Some of them, I think, secretly want there to be an attack on the United States so they can blame it on me.
It's a very dramatic comment. This is a victory for him politically, but it seems like it's a polarizing victory.
There you have Matt Lauer's take from NBC News there. A polarizing victory, perhaps. Hey, Lauer there claiming this has been a victory for Rand Paul. But Daniel, do you think in the long run this is really going to be a victory for Rand Paul? You mentioned that this is probably only going to delay discussion of the Freedom Act for a day or two.
Well, it shows that when Rand Paul stakes out a position, he can have a big impact. So it's a victory, certainly in the short term for Rand Paul. He's all over the headlines. We're talking about him. It should help his campaign because he's really ascending in the national spotlight. But in terms of the future, it's going to depend on the climate. Obviously, if there, God forbid, there were an attack, that would obviously hurt him. And this comment he made about his opponents wishing there were an attack, I think that's kind of silly, and he probably wishes he hadn't said it. And on the other hand, Senator McCain's comments about him, I think, were also a little over the top, and I think they should sort of
really. What part about McCain's comments specifically do you think were over the top?
I think that he was accusing Rand Paul of using this issue for political gain, and I don't think that's fair. You don't think
that's fair?
No, I don't think it's fair.
You don't think? I mean, he's also selling, filibuster kits on his campaign website. Take a Stand with Rand has been circulated. He ran that kind of silly campaign commercial.
Which is actually very clever.
Or his PAC, I should say, his Muscle Man campaign commercial. Of course he's trying to use this for political gain.
Look, the founding fathers of this country did not want a federal government collecting all of our records all of the time. They didn't like the federal government. That's why we got out of England. We didn't want to have a king. We wanted to be free. So Rand Paul is following in that libertarian tradition, and I think that reasonable people can disagree on this issue, and it's not so simple to say that, well, one side is patriotic and the other is not. I think that reasonable people can disagree on this issue, and I think Senator Paul can be making a stand as a matter of conscience to say, look, we're Americans, and the government shouldn't be collecting and stockpiling our data all the time.
But are they really doing that? Because we had General
Yes, they're really doing that. That's what this is about.
We've had a lot of former, we had a former member from CIA, General Hayden, say that there's a lot of confusion about that. They don't have time to do that. They're not mass collecting this. They have to have reasonable suspicion for doing what it is you're saying they're doing, that they're not doing this all the time. Is he wrong?
Yes, he's wrong. That's exactly what this act is. It's a a mass collection of telephone records, which will then allow the government to sort it out later. So that's what Rand Paul is really objecting to here. Rand Paul is not objecting to presenting information to an intelligence court and getting a warrant so that we can go after bad guys. This is about mass collection of data. And is there a tension between our privacy and the safety of the country? Of course. But, you know, having a democracy is risky.
It is risky indeed. We're going to have Daniel Hochheiser back. We're going to talk about what may happen next, and that is the discussion on the USA Freedom Act coming up. Already been passed by the House. Will the Senate be next? Daniel Hochheiser coming back with more of our roundtable right after this.
And we're back with round two of our roundtable, and joining us now is President of Citizens for Self-Governance, attorney Mark Meckler. Thanks for staying with us. Glad we could get this all settled. And New York criminal defense attorney and radio host Daniel Hochheiser. Thanks so much for sticking around.
All right, guys, I want to get to the Iowa straw poll in a second,
right,
but we wanted to let Daniel wrap up and get your take on this, Mark. We were talking about Rand Paul and his tack that he's taking on with his protest against the Patriot Act, at least the bulk data part of that. Let's let Daniel wrap up, because one of the things I think a lot of folks can agree with is Rand Paul trying to raise awareness and bring attention to this issue. But at the same time, it does seem like, Daniel, he's trivializing it a little bit by the way he's going about it.
Well, I think one middle ground that I believe the president referred to, which seems very logical and reasonable to me, is to let the telephone companies secure all these telephone records. So if in the future a judge does sign a warrant because the government has established probable cause, then these records will be available to the government and they can use them to go after the bad guys. So that seems to me to be the way this debate and the resolution of this issue is headed.
And Mark, what do you think? We're talking about the USA Freedom Act there, where it's the phone companies that hold all this information, not the government. Do you think that is a viable workaround? Does that accomplish anything?
I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think that the phone companies right now have the technological capability to do that, so there's a lot of details to be worked out. And I'd like to go back. I think the question is Rand Paul approaching this in an appropriate manner? I don't have a problem with him holding things up, but when he attacks fellow Republicans and say that they would likely like to see a large terrorist attack that they can blame on him, he shows that he's making verbal missteps. I agree with Daniel. He probably regrets after the fact. Remember, last week he said that Republicans had created ISIS. I think he's creating problems for himself with his own base.
Yeah, and you see how, you know, when you look at the rest of the party, how they lined up against, just to get a chance to comment against Rand Paul. We played a clip from Bobby Jindal earlier this week, and then you had Britt Hume on Fox News calling Rand Paul paranoid. That's a fair assessment from you, Mark?
I mean, again, that might be extreme language. I would say political. I would say what he's doing is he's using political rhetoric to deal with very serious circumstances where he has some important points to make, and I think that rhetoric is obfuscating his legitimate points.
All right, fair enough. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the future a little bit more, but we also do want to talk about the Iowa straw poll, Miranda.
We do. A presidential election staple in past elections is trying to stay credible as big players in the 2016 election begin to drop out. Former Governors Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee won't be participating this year. Mark, I want to get your take on that. Some GOP leaders are saying that the event is just a spectacle and it isn't really relevant anymore. What are your thoughts?
I would agree with that. I think it's been a long time, if ever, that the straw poll was actually relevant. It was a circus. It might have been good for Iowa at one point. There's a long history of folks who win the straw poll doing very poorly as we go through primary season. So I actually think it's a healthy development if the Iowa straw poll goes away.
And what do you think, Daniel? Do you agree with that assessment?
I think the Republicans are running away from it in large part because it's sort of a either break even or losing proposition. If you do well in the straw poll, okay, you can continue your campaign and then you still have to win the Iowa caucuses in February. But if you do poorly or you don't meet your expectations for the straw poll, then it can really endanger your campaign. And I don't think these Republicans want to risk that.
Yeah, nowadays too, there are so many versions of similar straw polls. We have a national media, we got the internet that can spread this information around, and we just had a new poll coming out today, or I think over the weekend, from the GOP candidates from the Des Moines Register looking at things.
Saying that Walker's now in the lead. And in the last Iowa straw poll, it was Ben Carson So, and Scott Walker hasn't even announced yet.
And last time around in the 2012 election cycle, it was Michelle Bachmann who won the Iowa straw poll, and we know what happened there.
Right.
No relation.
So you think they should just do away with them? What do you think, Mark?
Well, you know, again, it's a privately run thing, so they can do away with them or not, whatever they want. I think the market will bear it out here. Either people will pay attention and the candidates will attend and it will continue, or not. It's really up to the people in the market to decide.
Yeah, they had to pare this down somehow. But without that particular straw poll, the attention, of course, is going to be someplace else. You know, we're not going to go a day or two without talking about some poll. Where do you think these candidates are going to start applying their energy now? We hear about these state strategies. Daniel, do you think that's going to work in the long run? Are they trying to game the system too much, these GOP candidates?
I think it's about focusing their resources where they think they can make them count the most. So, you know, the other problem with the Iowa straw poll and even the caucuses is, you know, it favors certain people in certain parts of the country. So perhaps a Wisconsin governor may do better than, say, a New Jersey governor like Chris Christie, because, you know, it's their neighbor and they're Midwestern people. So, you know, I actually personally am not a big fan of having these very small states have such a tremendous impact on our national politics, because I just don't think that makes for a good representative campaign.
Well, guys, unfortunately, we are out of time. We got to wrap it up there. Mark Meckler, glad you could check in with us. Good to see you as always. And Daniel Hochheiser, great to see you as well.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it makes a really good point. It just depends where you live. More to come here on Newsmax Now.